Hello, everyone. I am Professor Sonika Bhatnagar from NSUT, Delhi. Today, I'm here on behalf of BioFootprints Foundation. I'm speaking to Professor Shandar Ahmed from JNU. Professor Shandar Ahmed is a leading researcher from computational biology and bioinformatics area. He has worked with many leading institutes like Jamia Millia Islamia, like National Institute of Biomedical Innovation, Osaka, and Kyushu Institute of Technology, Japan. He has been the Dean of SCIS, the School of Computational and Integrative Sciences at JNU, from 2018 to 2020, and now he's the coordinator for the DVT Bioinformatics facility in his school. On the personal front, Professor Shandar Ahmed is a prolific writer. He writes in Hindi, in Urdu and English. He has published a book on English guzzles, and he also runs 2 YouTube channels. One for his lab, the SciY lab, and the second is for Shandar Thought. So it's my pleasure to welcome you, Shandar, on the first issue of Sands of Time for BioFootprints Foundation. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Sonika, if I can call you by your first name. So it's great to interact with you and share some of my experiences. And it is also, I take it as an opportunity to evaluate myself and see where I stand. So it is not just a matter of students or participants to know about the sands of time that I have been stuck by, but also to look at my own journey and what is to be done. Thank you.
That's very interesting, actually. We all pass through the sands of time and stand still sometimes just to look back and see how far we have progressed. And that's a very interesting way of looking at it. Actually, I'm very curious about what brought you to the field of science. What was your early education and background?
So I studied in very small schools, and I was born to parents who had not been to university before, but my mother was very enthusiastic and was very keen that I should study. And perhaps she didn't get the opportunities to go to university, which she would have liked to do. And she passed that passion on to me. And I would attribute at the outset most of my shaping of my personality into science and as a person to my mother. And it is not very often that I get this opportunity to talk about my family and to remember my mother in this way. And I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to her. She's no more.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So this is one thing, and I studied in very small schools. I never went to the the traditional schools that today we have, like the nurseries, KGs, etc. I started straight away. I jumped to the 3rd standard, and for many reasons at that time, because when my mother took me to the school, and the one school that she knew nearby did not have a vacancy in the 1st standard. So they said, okay, if you can train your child to this much, then we can admit it in 2nd to 3rd or 4th. That is where the vacancy is, assuming that perhaps this child will not come back to the school. But the child and his mother were very adamant, and that's how I entered into this education, a little ahead of my time. Yeah. So now, question about how I got into science. So by the very nature of the way I was exposed and the way my conversations were held in my family with my parents, as I said, despite them not having been to university. So I was always fascinated to everything intellectual, be it language, be it poetry, or be it science. So at that time, I didn't understand that the science is a different vocation, and then the poetry is different, literature is different. So the intellectual activity and the way my teachers influenced me, I had wonderful teachers. Although it was a small school called Mazharul Islam Secondary School next door to my home, It was just about 5 minutes walk from my house to the school, and I had wonderful teachers, not very famous teachers, but they had big impact on me, and I was very dear to them. They used to see me as a small child, so they used to pay me extra attention because I was the smaller than all other peers in my school. So that the way my family and my school and perhaps something intrinsic in me influenced my quest for the intellectual journey, and the path to the scientific career is very much an outcome of that.
And how do you see yourself as a scientist and a teacher now that you are a professor yourself? How do you see?
So yes, this is a very important and pertinent question today, and this is where somewhere I perhaps do not attribute to the classical traditional view of a teacher, in particularly in our country. So first, a scientist, what is the job of a scientist? Like any other profession, scientist is also very much a profession today. And scientists, as I said, although I came into science in pursuit of my intellectual needs or desires, but very soon I realized that science is not just about pursuing the intellectual urges. It is also serving the society. It is also finding solutions to the societal problems. And therefore, whatever science we do should not be just a kind of a fascination with itself. We should not just fall in love with the science per se. So science has to have a long-term goal, what it is trying to achieve and how it is going to help humanity do better and solve the problems that it is facing. So that is how I see science and scientist as a career. Now, another aspect of this is, although scientists may have lots of wishes to serve society, to serve his own intellectual urge, but ultimately he's working in a professional environment, and he's being paid not for his personal upliftment. He's being paid for serving the interests of the organizations that he serves. So keeping that in mind, so there has to be a good balance, that we choose a job which allows to pursue our intellectual journey, and which also allows, but at the same time, nobody will pay us today, or any time in the past, nobody would pay us if we are doing something totally personal. So in that sense, science should not be treated as purely a personal affair. It is a social affair, and it is also a business affair, and it has components ranging from the industry to the society, to personal, and many other aspects. So scientist today has to be aware about where he stands and what is the range, what is his sphere of influence in which he can make a difference. This is about the scientist, how he chooses his problems to work on, how he chooses an organization to work in, and how he delivers on the objectives that he sets for himself, whether they have to be short-term objectives or whether they have to be long-term objectives, whether he should write a paper immediately as soon as he finds something, or whether he should wait for going through the maximum, most serious rigor and come up with something extraordinary. So depending on that, he has to position himself. And as a scientist, he has to make these choices almost every day. This is about science. And the second part
I would like to ask you about the SciWi Lab, which I see some of your students, and especially on your page, it's a very dynamic kind of a group, and it's very happening. So how do you make that happen, and how do you enjoy it now that it has happened?
Thank you for taking note and liking it. So as I said, the scientist has to be aware about the societal needs. Now, when we become teacher scientists, mostly guiding PhD students and these students going to higher levels of research pursuit. So, can you excuse me? Sorry. So I don't see them as a kind of a hierarchical relationship between students and teachers. So this is where I totally do not entirely fit into the system of the Guru Shishya Parampara that we have had in our system, and it is similar to, like, in our culture we say mother's feet have the paradise, heavens, and all. So perhaps I do not attribute to that kind of a relationship between the people who have lived before us and the people who will live after us. It is just a matter of, we are in a journey, and some people may have come into this journey before us, and some people will come after us. So we are essentially all doing the same thing. Just because we come in different time points do not make us different, and do not determine our higher or lower position in hierarchy. So first of all, this. Secondly, it is times have changed. Maybe the hierarchical relation and the role of teacher as something close to God has ceased to exist for many reasons, for many practical reasons. One of them, as I said, as scientist is now a paid job. It is not the scientist in the older times used to be an intellectual activity of the royal class. So they were not doing science for a profession. They were already rich. They were already royalty. And they were doing science out of their own intellectual pursuit, or out of their self-actualization, as you call them in psychology. So, but today scientists are doing a job to earn their living, and teachers are also doing their job to earn their living. So in their pursuit to earn this living, they have also the flexibility that no other profession offers. So that is in the teaching profession, you come across a lot of brighter people than yourself. And dealing with people who are brighter than yourself, who are at even if they may be at different stage of their career, is a challenge. Sometimes it may lead to jealousy among teachers. Sometimes it may lead to a kind of loss of self-esteem in the teachers. So the times have changed. We are dealing with people who are at different stages. Teaching has become a profession. From the student perspective, there was a time when student had nobody else and no other source of learning. Teacher was the only source of knowledge, and therefore their entire growth, intellectual growth, was dependent on how they interact with their teachers. But this is not so today. The students here today perhaps learn much less today from teachers than from so many other experiences that they get. They go to movies, they watch things on internet, even the educational material that they receive from teachers in the actual professionally teachers to whom they're accountable is not of that much of a degree that it used to be. So teacher has to be conscious of the change in times, and teacher has to find his place in the student's life and career according to the current realities. And so if teacher is not providing education, teacher is not the primary education giver, if teacher is not superior intellectually to the student, then what is the role of teacher, particularly at the research stage? Does it mean the teacher has become useless? It is up to an individual teacher. A teacher has a role to provide an environment, a real practical environment, a social environment in which a research is pursued, in which education can be received. So especially focusing on those aspects of the teaching learning process, which is not available through online media, through the other sources of knowledge. So teacher has to fill that gap. And also teacher has to provide a happy environment in which the students can feel motivated and can give their best. Many a times students at this stage, if I just focus on the PhD students, because that is the maximum amount of time I spend on. So if you look at PhD students, many of them are dealing with their many different life challenges from their family, from their personal life, and from their educational, and their career. And so if the teacher also becomes another source of their stress, this is it is a big dishonesty of a teacher in his job. So that is how I see a teacher. A teacher has to de-stress his students, provide a good intellectual academic environment, and also, of course, professionally and scientifically, he has to show the students the right way of doing research, what is a good research, what is not a good research, and what is an ethical practice, what is an unethical practice in the academic pursuit. The actual, what so-called typical run-of-the-mill activities or relations between teacher and student of imparting, writing some equations on the blackboard and then getting them copied by the students is totally obsolete.
That's good.
It is, yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. So I would also like to say that, science is an all-consuming profession. It just does tend to consume you. Research ideas are like that. They take so much time and effort to actualize. And a lot of scientists now look at research like immersive. They will literally, that's the only thing that many tend to do. But you have chosen to branch out into other areas like writing and poetry and running your YouTube channels. How do you see yourself in that?
So, as I said, the teacher role. So, if when I talk about myself as a teacher, I also think of some of my teachers that who have taught me, and so many of them have been wonderful teachers. Some left very good impression, but I must admit that some of them left bad impression also, and perhaps I may be leaving some bad impressions on some students. So this is individual teachers may be different. So I remember one of those interactions with one of my teachers who advised me that a good intellectual, a good successful person should grow like a tree. That is, he should specialize and go become a high and tall tree. That is, the tree grows, the stem goes high, and then when it goes to the top, it expands. So that was the idea that I was exposed to by one of my teachers, that we should expand, or we should branch out later. We should not branch out too early. We should not become interdisciplinary at the root or at the stem. But this was, I'm mentioning this story not to say that I attribute to this. I'm mentioning this story to say that I totally disagree. I have not branched out later. It is not that I did science and then I branched out to poetry and all. My from the very early stages of my life, my intellectual pursuit, my scientific and professional and societal pursuit have been holistic. I have never worked in a narrow framework, be it my professional work or be it my social interactions. I have never looked into the narrow interests of my family or my community or my city. I have always personally and have been attracted to or fascinated by uh, um, breadth of ideas and breadth of knowledge. So I don't see poetry, literature, or science, or music, or anything. Some of these arts are close to me. I like to contribute to them. Some of these arts I don't know anything about, but all of them impress me, and all of them attract me. So in that sense, the pursuit for the academic activity, intellectual activity, cannot be in isolation. Now, coming to the practical aspect of it, if you look at in science, the many great discoveries have been made because people who were studying a particular discipline were also cognizant at taking note of what is happening in other fields. So many, for instance, I work in computational biology. If people were not studying biology, a computer scientist was not aware of what is an evolutionary theory and how does the genetic evolution take place, he would never be able to develop a genetic algorithm or evolutionary computing. So the greatest discoveries and the most fascinating discoveries have come from people who have been aware of and who have been able to connect the different facets of knowledge that exist around us. And that's what I am, one of those ordinary beings who have been thinking along those lines. So I've not branched out. It is that my pursuit from the beginning has been holistic in nature, and it has remained so, despite myself choosing science as a career, other things. So the choices have become like one of them, out of these pursuits, I have never thought of taking literature as a profession. So science has always been my first passion, and I see myself more as a scientist when I think. And but these pursuits, which were holistic in nature, they continue in my personal capacity.
And they contribute to your science or not?
They do. I mean, in some sense, they help me in framing my scientific communication better, because when we do good science, we also have to communicate it to people. So if I have a good understanding of language, if I have a better way of saying things, what I have picked up or what I have discovered, it definitely helps. So it is not totally antithetical. If I can put in perspective, there was a time when the top journals like Nature and all, they used to have a section on poetry. I was reading recently a book about the poets and things.
Nice.
So the journals of this level used to have poetry, and many top scientists, even Nobel laureates, used to write poetry. So it is not that something that we have to be defensive about. I have kept my poetry usually private for a long period of time, but recently it has come in public domain, and so this is not
Having
totally ended.
heard about all your various activities, I should ask that now in future or in the immediate or the long-term future, what are some of your dreams and what are some of the things that you look forward to?
So yeah, as I said in the beginning, that it is a time to this like we sitting here today. So it's a time to review what we have done, where we stand, and all. So it is actually everything is future. I don't see much on day-to-day basis. I don't see myself much into the past. It is very little that I see in the past. So I would say that whatever I have set goals for myself, maybe I may have achieved a few percentage of that. So most of that is in the future. It's a long journey, and I hope I can continue to travel this. So I do see doing better science, reaching out to more people through my work in science, in literature, in different languages, Urdu, Hindi, and English. I would love to learn more languages. I would love to learn more disciplines like psychology, sociology, and a bit of history, but not so much of history, a little bit of history. And also, in terms of science, I would like this science to become more relevant for society, more valuable to solve problems, and have translational value. That is, it should solve problems of the real tangible problems like can it make drugs, can it improve productivity. So I do see myself moving more in the direction of applied research and having solutions which will be welcomed by industry and by society in general. In the scientific field and in the literary field, I hope to reach more people and try to try to bridge the gaps that are building between people, and so that none of us remains narrow either in science, in our academic pursuit, or in our social approach. This is, I hope I can do, but only a very little has been done so far. So I say that I have only taken the first step. Sitting with you reminds that it is not that I'm not sitting idle. I've come out of my home, but now coming out of home is just the first step. There is the whole world to conquer.
It has been so wonderful talking to you, Professor Shandar Ahmed. You not just come across as a dedicated scientist, but also as a very relatable and kind human being who has tried to reach across to many people with his science, with his poetry. And we thank you very much for appearing on this first issue of Sands of Time. It's been wonderful having you.